Hello. Hi, William.
Hello.
Bell. Hmm. Joao.
Hi,
Wow.
Professor.
Hi, Joao.
You got that right.
Did I? No, I doubt it, but it's probably closer. I'm brushing up on my Portuguese. Hang on a
It's
second.
really good. It's a
Oh,
hard
is
name.
it?
Yeah, it's a
Yes.
hard name.
Yes, for people who don't speak that language, it certainly is. Hang on a second. I've got to make Joe a co-host. Make a co-host. Okay. Yeah. So, Anthony, haven't seen you in a while.
I know I got busy with some situation but I'm here now.
Okay,
Sorry.
I'm glad you're here. So while we wait for the others to come in, I don't think I've grilled you yet on what your status is in your education and where you're headed.
This is I'm taking my last two classes this semester, so I'll be done after this. Um and
Done
I'm
for a PhD, a master's?
master's.
Okay, got it.
And then after that I'm hoping for like a data science job or any software engineering job really.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Uh, yeah, so data science. Okay, any software engineering job.
Yeah,
Is software engineering sort of the what in my day we might call any kind of programming or
yeah.
systems engineering? I mean, it's sort of a generic name for a job in the high tech industry,
Right.
at
And
least the
like
computer part of it.
yeah, for
Got it.
programming for sure.
Okay. Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it. Got it. All right. Well, good luck on all of that.
Thank you.
Um, okay. I choose to grill Dipsy. Dipsy, what are you doing and how are you going about it? Well, maybe Dipsy's not answering. All right, let's see, let's see.
Yeah, it looks like you might have
Appreciate.
scared off Dipsy, Dr. Adelman, because Dipsy's out now.
Oh, okay. Who said that? Was that you, Jason?
Yes.
Oh, yeah, I probably did. Huh. Okay.
I was gonna tell you I'm actually getting an RSA token this week for work. I just started a new job, so be interesting.
Really? You could have given me the money directly.
That
Uh,
would have been good. Yeah, I just wired it to you.
yeah, that's right. Okay,
I
so
uh
yeah.
I just got a new job at Boeing though, so I'll be staying with Boeing and then
Hey,
working with
congratulations.
them. Thanks.
What are you doing?
I'm working for the P8 program, which is like if you know like the 737, it's kind of just like the military version of it.
Yes, yes, you mentioned that earlier to me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, so I started
good.
on Friday, and today was my second day. So
Great. Glad to hear it. Another success. Uh-huh.
yeah, it's my first software job actually, because this master's is helping me pivot. So pretty cool.
Pivot from what, by the way?
Manufacturing engineering.
Oh, okay. Hmm. Hmm. Yeah. Um, so if it's like the 737, 737's been around for like 25 years or something.
Yeah, I was reading up on it a little bit more today. I guess in like 2006 or something, the Navy put out like a request to all companies saying we need a new, plane that's going to be like the best of the best. And
Yeah.
then a bunch of companies submitted their bids, and then Boeing won, so that became the P8.
Yeah, that's what always happens,
Mhm.
right? But I suspect now that unlike the 737, since this is presumably going to transport troops and things,
Mhm.
uh, yeah, it probably has all sorts of really cool electronics and
Yep.
stealth capability and all that stuff. Where
We're
the
creating
seven,
the operating systems that run on the mission systems controls, like
yeah.
the big boards that they're doing with
Wait,
all
you
like
faded a little bit there.
oh, we're programming the mission systems controls.
Yeah.
So like just their big computers that like aren't flying the planes. It's the ones that are like communicating and like,
Yeah.
doing
Yes,
stuff on the outside of the plane, like dropping like supplies or like whatever it be doing. So
I got you. Sort of the logistics of flying that plane from A to B,
yeah, even
whatever
like
that means.
military logistics.
Yeah, gotcha. Sounds fun.
Yeah.
And Martino, you've come back. You disappeared for a while just when I had about 90 new questions about physics and thermodynamics,
Hi.
but hopefully we'll get to that later.
I'm sorry. On Wednesday, I had a doctor's appointment right at 2, so I wasn't able to make the class.
Yeah, it's no problem, but I do want to, uh, find out more about what we were talking about life and stuff.
Dr. Adelman, before we jump into things too, I was wondering when we should expect to receive feedback on our proposed papers.
Yeah, the papers. Okay, Isabel, I am going to send you a suggestion for a time when we can meet via Zoom, and we'll maybe we can look at all the proposals and make comments on each one of them. And it would
Yeah,
help me if you'd look at them first.
I did take a really quick look at
Yeah.
the topics and the papers. So
Mhm.
yeah.
Okay, so we'll arrange a time
Okay.
and to take care of a bunch of little things that I have neglected. Thank you. Um, all right. So without further ado, you guys ready to jump into the book again? And all right, let's see. The recording is going. William, I am about to set share sound. All right. Now, you no doubt remember last time how you shot a bunch of bullets through my, immortality thing. And I thank you for that. I think I've recovered from it and I've rewritten that chapter and I think it's much better. So thank you. Where we left it last time was that we were talking about what the lifetime of cars is likely to be in 2100. Yeah. And we mumbled about, well, maybe it'd be very short. For example, if you just went up to your 3D printer when you needed a car and had it print one out for you, and then you recycled it when you got home, if that was cheap enough, then the cars wouldn't last long. On the other hand, it could also be the case that by 2100, material science would have taken and computer science would have taken us to cars that are so accident resistant that you buy one for your entire life, so it lasts a long time. Maybe you even will it to your descendants. Okay, so here we are.
Perhaps it will be very short, because making cars will have become so inexpensive that people expect to use them once and then discard them. Perhaps it will be very long, because technology will have made it possible to build cars that are virtually accident-free and mechanically indestructible, and each person expects to buy one that lasts their entire life. The point is, that while the goal of maximizing ROI does not change, the best design for achieving it does and depends on the environment.
Right? So the businessman that we were talking about wants to maximize the return on investment. But how to do that best depends on the environment, right? To maximize ROI in 2100 might require building very short-lived cars, but it might require building very long-lived cars. It's just what'll produce the best bottom line for that environment. Okay.
Most importantly, the best design at any particular moment has almost nothing to do with longevity.
That's really part of the take-home message. That for the CEO, the best design may be cars that don't last a long time or cars that last a very long time. It doesn't matter. It's whatever in that environment will maximize as best the CEO can discern it, the ROI. Yes. And of course, that's going to apply to genes as well.
The situation with gene sets is essentially the same as with CEOs. The gene set's job is to maximize ROI. Number of copies in this generation / number of copies in previous generation. If the gene set's competitors consistently produce greater ROI, then the gene set will fail. It will be a victim of natural selection. Gene sets do not care whether their organisms live a short time like mice, or a long time like bowhead whales. Gene sets don't have crystal balls that show them what the environment will be in the future. They must choose a design as best they can and build new organisms with that design. It will only be when a new organism with that design is born and encounters the environment in which it will live, that its lifespan and return on investment will be determined. For example, Tyrannosaurus genes were doing pretty well with their designs for a few million years. But it appears that about 66 million years ago, the then current design encountered an environment much different from anything that had preceded it. That design and that environment together determined that each Tyrannosaurus, including each T-Rex, should die immediately and yield no further return on investment. So that is how the life expectancy of mice, whales and other creatures is determined by the genes and the environment, with virtually no concern for whether the creatures themselves live a long time or not. Lecture-21.
Okay. We good on that? We're relatively good. Any questions? All right. Now we're going to turn to when do humans die?
20250402 Part 2. When do humans die? In When Do Creatures Die? We saw that the human genes do not care how long people live. On the other hand, people care a lot.
Right? The genes don't. We've already sort of given enough evidence to support that.
Because of this, there has been a huge amount of work done to determine aspects of human life expectancy. Much of this work is of a statistical nature, and whole sub-areas of statistics, such as survival analysis and failure analysis, have grown up around it. The World Health Organization reports, WHO, 2023. The world life expectancy as of October of 2023 was 73 years. Why 73? How has life expectancy changed through time, and what part did the genes and the environment play?
So the genes and the environment are going to determine how long people live. And so we're going to try to understand how our life expectancies have changed since 1770 and what were the factors, mostly the genes, mostly the change in the environment.
Here is a graph of life expectancy since 1770. Figure 29, life expectancy through time.
Okay, there's a graph. So we're starting at 1770 and we're going up to roughly now. And we're looking at life expectancy. So you can see this line, the jagged one is what happened in Sweden. Okay, and then the solid red one is what happened in the world, as best we can discern it. Okay, so in 1770 in the world, the life expectancy, at least given here, is about late 20s or to 30. But then it followed this trajectory. I don't know what happened right then, but it followed this trajectory and ends up being the 73 or whatever years that it now is, according to the WHO. Okay. Well, actually, is this the WHO saying that? Okay, I'm not sure this is the WHO's data, but it's somebody's given there. Okay, now Sweden followed a similar path, but seems to have started maybe offset by about 10 years better. Okay, so why Sweden and okay.
Notice that in 1770 the world life expectancy was about 30 years. So, in the roughly 250 years since, it has jumped 43 years. The graph starts in the second half of the 18th century, and I have singled out Sweden, because it was there and then, for the first time, reliable census data started to be collected. That data can be found at the Berkeley Mortality Database, Wilmouth, 2018. Do we know anything about life expectancy prior to 1770? In fact, many researchers have estimated the life expectancy for pre-18th century humans and their hominin ancestors, relying on indirect means such as the analysis of skeletal remains. These estimates include some that go back to the Paleolithic.
So there was the Neolithic, and I guess that began, ballpark 12,000 BC. And that's when you get what would be called anyway, it is the New Stone Age. Lithic means stone. The New Stone Age, where people are starting to get tools, they're making pots, they've starting to establish agriculture. The Paleolithic is sort of the old Stone Age, where people weren't doing those things, but they might have been making crude tools, for example, to bash somebody on the head or take their skin off. Okay, so it's older than 12,000 BC.
A summary of the findings can be found at Wikipedia Lif. Remarkably, it appears that life expectancy may have been roughly 30 years for the last few million years.
So 30 years, we were stuck on 30 years, at least as best I can discern from the evidence that's available.
So, what happened since 1770 that made such a dramatic change?
So we went from 30 to 73, all in, 250 years. So what happened? Well, here's what happened.
The Industrial Revolution.
Yes. So the Industrial Revolution, I assume you're familiar with it. So it begins roughly around 1750, 1770. All right. And here's what happened.
The many innovations since the start of the Industrial Revolution resulted in great advances in agriculture, architecture, engineering, commerce, public hygiene, medicine, and other areas. These advances impacted current life expectancy in at least 3 ways. They reduced.
Okay, so at least 3 ways did this change, all these innovations affect human life expectancy. And here's the most important way.
They reduced child mortality. They protected us from many mortal threats such as starvation, exposure, injuries, and infectious diseases. As a result, we are now inhabiting an environment analogous to that of mice in protected environments or cars in the lab.
So you remember we talked about how mice in the wild live about a year, but mice in protected environments live maybe 2 to 3 years. And it's no surprise that in protected environments, like within the cage inside of a laboratory where you're getting fed all the time, you don't get eaten by cats and you don't get eaten by other things and you don't starve to death. And so no big surprise, you might live longer if so many things that were killing you in the wild no longer can. And we saw cars where this car was supposed to last 100 years in the lab, but when it gets in the real world, all bets are off. Okay. So these are these protected environments. And what the Industrial Revolution brought to mankind was to sort of place him in a protected environment, right? He didn't die of starvation largely. He was protected better against infectious diseases. He could withstand injuries because they could be repaired or whatever, and all sorts of things that removed ways that he used to get killed. And so he lives longer. Okay. And finally, the third reason
They
is
gave rise to technology that allows us to replace, repair, and preserve various human parts. For example, we can replace some parts with transplants and joint replacement surgery, repaired some with angioplasty and ligament reconstruction, and preserved some with statins, exercise, healthy eating, and wise life choices.
okay. So these are my view of the three important things that changed our life expectancy from about 30 years to 73. Okay.
In the second half of the 18th century in Sweden, the life expectancy was about 35 years. The probability that a newborn would reach age 15 was about 60%.
Okay. So that meant 40% of newborns did not make it to age 15. Maybe I should. Yeah. Okay. They were victims of child mortality.
60%. The life expectancy, from birth, of the cohort of people who did reach 15 was 59 years.
So here's the important thing. As someone said long ago in the class, human life expectancy used to be bimodal. That is, you had a good chance of dying before you reach 15, but if you reach 15, then your further life expectancy would bring you to 59 years. Okay. So, okay. Okay.
The probability of dying before age 15 is less than 1%.
I guess I'm now referring to what happened after the Industrial Revolution. Oh, I see. There's the word today up there. Today, the probability of dying before age 15 is less than 1%. It used to be 40%.
Probability of dying before age 15 is less than 1%. Hence the cohort of people who survive to age 15 has greatly expanded. This alone seems to have about doubled human life expectancy. Presumably, it has also contributed to a large increase in world population.
So a lot of the increase in life expectancy, I mean, we should all be pleased that instead of living 30 years, we live 73. However, on a personal note, most of that change didn't matter for you and I, because most of it is due to the fact that a lot more people reached age 15, maturity. Okay. And so for those who did reach 15, even in Sweden, they were going to live to be about 59. Okay. So you've already made it over the hump. So you get to live at least, on average 59 years. Of course, we do better, but all right.
Roughly speaking, there are two ways to die: internal causes and external causes. Internal causes are what people would die from if they spent all their lives in a perfectly protected environment that would keep them safe from external insults. Informally, internal causes are the result of parts wearing out. They include things like heart attacks, strokes, kidney failure, and cancers that result from degradation of the immune system. External causes are all the causes except the internal ones and include things like starvation, gluttony, predation, infectious diseases, suicide, and exposure.
So I've drawn this line, and it's not a perfectly clear one, but there are internal causes of death, which is basically parts wear out. Okay. And there's external causes, which are the result of, quote, insults received from the outside world. So this is the same way with cars. Cars can stop working because their parts break, their, things wear out. They can also stop working if a boulder falls on them. Yes. One's an internal, according to what I'm suggesting, cause, and the other is an external cause. So external causes do include things like starving to death. They also include sort of gluttony. That is, if you eat a ton of food and you gain a lot of weight, then you're going to die, but not because your parts wore out. They just couldn't handle the burden. They weren't designed to be able to bear. Okay.
Ones in include things like starvation, gluttony, predation, infectious diseases, suicide, and exposure. The protected environment we now live in, while not perfect, still protects us from many external causes of death. It is no surprise that when there are fewer things that can kill you, your life expectancy will rise. Finally, the technologies that allow us to replace, repair, or preserve some human parts can forestall parts failure and extend our lives. So, we humans live about 43 years longer than we did before 1770. We know from when do creatures die. That life expectancy can change as a result of changes in the genes and/or changes in the environment. Which of the two deserves more credit?
So the environment or the genes deserve more credit for our now living 43 years longer than we did a while ago. Any ideas of which the genes or the environment were more important?
The environment?
Yes. And what's your reason, Joao?
Well,
Joao.
both work, Professor. Thanks.
Okay.
Well, all the changes we talked about were external, right? The genes didn't change at all, so.
And there's a sense that the genes don't change very fast. So 250 years is not a heck of a long time for genetic changes in the human genome to have an impact. At least that's the prevailing wisdom. That seems correct.
It seems that the genes deserve little or no credit. It is often stated that the human gene set evolves slowly. More precisely, some human genes evolve slowly, see Endura and Ephemera. But, in any case, it seems reasonable to expect there has been little change in human genetics since 1770. So, the credit seems to go to the environmental changes that began with the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolutionaries and their successors have changed our lives in many ways. Adding 43 years to our life expectancy seems among the most remarkable.
Right? So many people bemoan, and perhaps correctly, the changes that have happened as a result of the Industrial Revolution have produced things that may be bad, pollution being such a thing, perhaps global warming. Okay. On the other hand, also produced something that is pretty good, which has given us 43 years greater life expectancy.
There are many deeper questions that we have not addressed. For example, consider the following figure showing the dependence of life expectancy on geography.
Okay. So what you're seeing here is, according to the United Nations, the average number of years a newborn would live in age-specific mortality rates. In the current year, if age-specific mortality rates in the current year were to stay the same throughout life. Okay, so basically the life expectancy. And it's showing that in some parts of the world, it's still in the 50s. In some parts of the world, it's pretty high. I guess that would be Australia, and that would be China, and that would be Canada. The US seems to be a little lower than those countries. Oh, and look, you're lucky. João. Brazil's on there with a nice dark color. Okay. So, all right. And so the question that raises is,
Why is life expectancy different in different geographical areas? How much of this is due to genetic differences and how much to environmental differences, including societal differences? We don't know, but perhaps our current tools will allow us to make progress on such questions.
so what do you think? Take some place that doesn't have a high life expectancy. Is it because, and this is the nature nurture problem again, is it because they are genetically different? Or is it because their societal, uh, their cultural trains are different? Mike?
Yeah, I think Julian had his hand up first, so you can go first.
Yes. Thanks, Mike. Julian.
Thank you, Mike. Um, yeah, I was just gonna say, that I know in countries like Mali, or a lot of, West African countries, the birth rate currently is around 7. And I think among all African countries, it's about around 5. And I know
Wait,
if you,
wait, wait. The birth rate, what do you mean by the birth rate being around 7? You mean,
so in the US, the birth rate's around 1.6.
okay, the number of children on average that
Yeah, yeah.
got it, got it.
And if you look at Europe in like the, 1800s, right around the creation of, the vaccine and when medical equipment started to be sterilized, things like that, the
Yeah,
birth rate was also around, like 5 to 7.
yes.
And I think it has to do a lot more with when countries industrialize as well as how wealthy they are. So now that a lot of African countries are industrializing, and they have access to, better medical equipment, more vaccines, things like this, um, and more hygienic medical equipment, that the birth rate is lower, or sorry, the birth rate is higher because there's a smaller infant mortality rate, and we're seeing the population boom. I think that Africa is supposed to have over 4 billion people by 2100. I think that Nigeria is supposed to be like the third most populous country by 2100. So,
Wow.
we're seeing this happen now, as what we saw happen in places like the US and in Europe in about the 1800s. So I think that, when you industrialize and how much money a country has is a big part of it.
Yeah, that's very interesting. Um, yeah, so I guess one would chalk that up to not due to genetic differences, but rather due to environmental differences. And you've pinned it even further to what environmental differences, and that industrialization has been slower to come to some places than it has to others. Interesting. Okay, Mike or Nathan is next. You guys
Go ahead,
figure
Mike.
it out. Okay, thanks.
So yeah, just to piggyback off what Julian said, but kind of in a
Yeah.
smaller sense, I think the blue zones are really cool to look at. Like they're super interesting all around the world. That's where people like tend to live into very old ages. It's not like this exact chart, but there's 5 identified ones and they're all around the world. Like one's in Japan, there's one in California, like Italy. And it's
Oh,
just
you're talking about like littler places than
yeah,
countries.
tiny communities. Yeah.
Yes. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
I think those are really cool because like you would think that they would all be like doing very similar things, but they're in completely like different parts of the world and their diets are all very different. And it's kind of cool to see like what could be like there have to be some similarities of why they're all so successful, but it's not like the obvious ones, I don't think, like
Oh,
food.
that's very interesting too, Mike. When I hear what you've said, and of course I don't know any of the details, uh, it could be that these populations are isolated and genetically different from one another, and it's the genes in that case that have a big impact. I, of course, don't know, but there are certainly, families or groups that have genes that tend to kill them young. All right. So if we squeeze down the size of areas we're talking about, maybe genes start to play a bigger role because the people are more homogeneous. Are these places? Oh, you say there's one in California.
Yeah, it's in Loma Linda. I'm not too familiar with California, but
Okay.
that's one of them.
So Loma Linda, does anybody know anything about Loma Linda and what goes on there? Because, yeah,
Just from looking at it, there's a description that it's like a group of Seventh-day Adventists who are like
huh.
it seems that like the thing that all of these zones have in common is they're like super community oriented. Like they're very small and they seem to have like one common trait, like a religion or like something else, where they're very socially together, like very not individual.
Yes, yes. So it's cultural prints. So in those cases. So it's also true that if it's a community of Seventh-day Adventists, is that the same as Mormon?
I don't think so, no, but I'm not a pro.
Okay. All right. It's not a particularly important point. But if they are, uh, then it could be that they also intermarry a lot. And I don't know how long Loma Linda's been doing this kind of thing, but it could also preserve a certain genetic advantage that that group has. So it became more complicated, I think, when you talk. Also, we have to worry about just plain coincidence, right? That is, for example, uh, I remember in the probably it was in the 70s when it became a big deal in the news that certain communities in the country had an abnormally high rate of cancers. And it was claimed that they were due to like, power lines or whatever, various people tried to explain it. But these communities were very small and the rate of cancer was being determined various ways in various communities. All right. So each community could say, what are the odds that we'd get this cluster of um, of cancers in such a small population? And the answer might be, according to somebody's calculation, well, it's 1 in 1 million, right? Except that the number of communities of that size might be enough to make 1 in 1 million occur sometimes. Or I didn't articulate that so well. So we'll move on. Nathan?
I wanted to bring up a different point. I'm gonna first say
Yes.
that I come with no answers, but I know that there's a number of kind of communities that share a lot of the same kind of genetic heritage that have been forced into diasporas around the world. So that might be an
Mhm.
interesting kind of approach to take a look at a lot of people who share the same genetic heritage or genetic advantage and see how they fare within um,
Oh,
multiple environments. But I will say that being forced into diaspora probably means something really bad has happened.
well, yeah. I mean, the diaspora that I'm most familiar with is the Jewish diaspora. Uh, are there other famous examples of that kind of thing where basically all the people in one location are forced to spread out over the world? Uh, the Jewish one's a good example. Um, and despite being spread out, the Jewish cultural creeds are very strong on marrying within the religion. And so they may have preserved a sort of genetic identity uh, despite their being spread around. I'm not sure where this leads us, Nathan, but I think it's a good comment. And yeah, it may be a way to try to get a handle on this. I like it. Ryan Rubel.
Oh, I was just going to say, since you asked about other diasporas, I think there was an African one, especially if you consider like the slave trade.
The what?
The slave trade, I think, is technically
Good.
considered an example of a diaspora.
I see. Okay. You made me think of two diasporas. One is just the out of Africa thing, where 70,000 years ago or something, out of Africa came some humans and they spread all around the world, maybe in several waves, I don't recall. But that is certainly a diaspora. And now you're saying uh, the slave trade may have been a diaspora. Yeah. Okay. Yes. I mean, the slave trade seems a little different than the Jewish situation because the large mass of people who lived in Africa were not dispersed out of Africa, right? In the Jewish case, at least according to the Bible, the Jews were conquered and forced out of Jerusalem, right? And so they sort of didn't retain a homeland. Whereas in Africa, that seems a little different. I don't know what the implications of those differences are. I'm just noting them. Okay. Luke?
Yeah, I wanted to chime in on the blue zone cities where people live super, super long. I've
Yeah.
looked into these a little bit before in the past, and I
Oh,
think
good.
some of them had, right, like for example, the one in Loma Linda, right? None of them drink, none of them smoke, none of them do, like have any of those lifestyle factors because they're Seventh-day Adventists. Um,
Oh, okay.
but in other places, right, they do all those things and still live a long time. And I think a lot of what, like Mike hit on it perfectly, a lot of what you can see that replicates between them is that as people get older, they still have value in society, right? So they're still relied on to do certain things. They're still, asked for their input. They're still, um, right? Like they still have an active role. And so to some degree, when I was looking at it, that was kind of my conclusion is that they're able to live longer because, right, to lack of a better degree, they still have a purpose. Um,
Yeah, that's rather interesting to me. And just to go off the rails here. Please, Luke, finish what you were going to say, and then
no,
I'll.
that's what I had. I wanted to chime in because I'd looked into it before.
Okay, I like that too. A lot of good ideas. Um, this purpose in life thing. I've thought about that, and I've come to see it, but I could be wrong. I don't know if it's a general thing. That purpose in life is provided by societies. It can also be provided by genes, but cultural preens. That is, if you're a member of a society, um, well, first, the genetic things give you purpose in life to raise your children, for example. The but the societal thing gives you purpose in life to try to keep uh, uh, satisfying the demands of the society. And you get rewarded with positive vibes, feelings, emotions when you're succeeding at that, and you feel less good when you're not. Now, um, so for example, in my case, I was, enslaved by the science math academic thing long ago. And and I do its bidding, right? It wants me to do the kinds of things I'm doing right now. In fact, you know, I'm doing it right now to you guys, right? I'm I'm making you want to be, hopefully, I'm making you want to be more involved in that society. Maybe I'm not, but that's what I'm trying to do. And I'm trying to write papers in math and other things that are goals put forth for me from the society. And so the society's feeding me satisfaction and dissatisfaction when I'm not achieving it. And so my purpose in life is to get positive feedback from my society to some extent. So that's what I sort of take. Is there, other than those things, the genetic things and this sort of societal thing that I described a special case of in myself, are there other purposes in life? I don't I don't know of any, but there may be some. I'm not hypothesizing that there are others, but this is where purpose in life comes from. And for example, uh, taking care of your kids and their kids, etc., is one purpose in life. Still trying to contribute to your society by helping other people is a societal purpose in life. I don't know that there's anything but that. Okay, so moving on. All right. So women.
Women. Have our genes designed some of our parts with expiration dates?
So parts, I mean, in a very general sense, like organs would be parts, but so might, I don't know. Anyway, whatever parts are. Okay, and it's an interesting thing.
Dates? The answer appears to be yes. For example, the placenta consists of both maternal and fetal tissue. The latter was part of you in utero but is not part of you now. It had an expiration date, discard after delivery.
Right? So it was an organ of yours when you were in the womb, but it stopped being an organ of yours later. It expired at the time of delivery.
Delivery. Notice that the placenta also had a retention period, keep until delivery. That is, do not fail before delivery.
Right? Okay. So the placenta had those.
Delivery. As we saw in When Do Creatures Die? How long a creature lives is determined by both the genes and the environment. This is also the case for individual parts. For example, the heart keeps working until we die, except in rare cases where the heart has been replaced and then stops working.
Right? How long does a heart last? For your entire life. And then it doesn't work anymore. Yes?
Since on average we now live for about 73 years, a heart on average lives 73 years. However, in Sweden at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution people, and hence hearts, on average lived for 35 years.
Right? So your heart now lives longer than it used to as well, right?
Since on average we now live for about 73 years,
Sorry,
a heart on
repeat.
average lives 73 years. However, in Sweden at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution people, and hence hearts, on average lived for 35 years. So, no matter how long the genes designed the heart to keep working without failure, how long it will actually work without failure is highly dependent on the environment. But this does not appear to be the case for the placenta. How long it will actually work without failure seems largely independent of the environment. For example, it would be quite surprising if in Sweden at the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, the placenta, on average, failed before delivery or stayed alive after it.
Right? That'd be surprising if we learned that the placenta, which is ex, ex, well, cast off by the mother at the time of birth, that is the fetal part of the placenta, and actually the maternal part as well, is cast off after birth. It'd be pretty surprising if it then, because it's separated when you cut away the umbilical cord, if then it would keep functioning till it was like 13 years old. I mean, that'd be pretty weird. Okay. And it would presumably be a very bad investment of resources for the genes to have made a placenta that could live for 13 years. Okay.
Perhaps this independence can be traced to the location of the placenta. It is within the amniotic membrane, in a stable local environment that is sequestered from the outside environment. So, I will assume that the genes designed the placenta to not fail before delivery. Now let's
Okay, so I'm going to assume that, okay, it would also be very strange if the genes had designed the placenta to fail 4 months into pregnancies, right? Because there'd be no offspring. If you guys have questions at any time, you don't have to wait for me to ask. Okay, so
return to the heart. Would it make sense for the genes to design hearts to fail before the placenta fails?
would it make sense for the genes to invest enough in your heart to keep it alive for, say, 4 months and then fail? Well, if that happened, then no babies would reach term. So a gene set that would design things that way is likely to go extinct. So I'm assuming that your heart is designed to function. That is, it's like a part in a car. It's designed to function for at least some time and not fail before then. Okay. So that's why you get 100,000 mile warranties and stuff. All right. That the genes would have designed the heart not to fail before you were born. It would have invested enough to make a good part. All right.
Of course not. That would violate Proposition 8.
You don't have to worry about what Proposition 8 is.
8. The same argument would apply to all vital parts, such as lungs, kidneys, and immune systems.
Cameron.
Yeah, hi, Professor.
Hi.
Well, I had a question though. So, if we do say like it is designed to a certain level, then what is that level, and then what does it mean for like certain people to have like their hearts, for example, be a lot healthier, stronger than other groups that exist, right? So, like, what is that sort of like base level, and is there such thing, or is it like it's all variable, I guess, depending on like the geography and demographics?
No, okay, it's a very good question. And I don't, being confused about this makes a lot of sense. All right. So here's what I'm saying. When the genes designed you, they took into consideration the same things that a car manufacturer would take into consideration. For example, they have to figure out whether or not they should make I'm not good on cars, but that they should make the engine out of tin or titanium or some other metal. And so they realized that they could make it out of tin. It'd be very inexpensive, but it would fail soon. Or they could make it out of steel, and it would be more expensive, but fail much, much later, expected time to failure. Okay, etc. And the genes must be making these kinds of decisions, because what they don't want to do is have things fall apart before they should. For example, before their offspring can reproduce. But they also don't want them to invest so much into them that the people die with really good parts because all that investment is lost. So it's a complicated situation. I probably can't explain it very well. There's other chapters here that have addressed it more deeply. But that part of being a gene set is to decide how long you're going to build parts to last. And there's both lower bounds, you don't want them to fail too soon, and upper bounds, you don't want them to be outlive the organism.
So
Yes.
can I ask a follow-up then for those lower
Sure.
bounds? Like what happens when like, you know, there's obviously complications during birth for a lot of children, and sometimes it comes to like certain parts not growing well or missing parts in the body that's like essential for function, yet
Yes.
they haven't grown it. What would you account those for then, within like I guess this sort of a realm?
Yeah, I would think, I mean, my initial reaction to that is, of course, this development of a child is taking place in the real world, and it can go bad. I mean, just like the car manufacturing plant can suddenly have a power surge or something, or a glitch in the computer program that's controlling the robots, and cars start coming out with really messed up engines that don't function at all. So I think that can happen. And the genes have to also take into account how to avoid such things as best they can. And they do spend resources on avoiding things like that. For example, repairing the damage of cosmic rays on the child or something. Okay, so this is complicated, so I don't expect, it'll soak in completely just by these words I'm uttering. Okay. But I'm saying it's a feature of gene sets, and gene sets that do not do that calculation well are going to probably go extinct at the hands of those that do them better.
Yep. True. Makes
Okay.
sense. Thank you.
Okay. Best I can do.
Now let's return to the heart. Would it make sense for the genes to design hearts to fail before the placenta fails? Of course not. That would violate Proposition 8. The same argument would apply to all vital parts, such as lungs, kidneys, and immune systems. It need not apply to non-vital parts such as teeth and hair.
Right. So it'd be nice if your teeth all lasted as long as you live, but they don't seem to me as important as the questions of hearts. So I agree that this is not as firm an argument as I would like it to be. Okay, so there's some degree of mumble here. Okay.
More generally, if there is some part which is designed by the genes not to fail for some period, then all vital parts would have to be designed by the genes not to fail until that part does.
Okay, so if, like in the placenta, it's designed to fail after birth, 9 months after it starts to be created, and therefore it wouldn't make sense to build some vital part to last less than 9 months. But what if we can find another vital part that is designed to last longer and then fail? Say a vital part that didn't fail after 9 months, but failed after 40 years or 50 years or 51 years. Okay. Then the same reasoning would apply, that all the vital parts would have to be designed at least to have an expected lifetime, at least as long as this part was designed to last.
Hence, with our assumptions, we can conclude that your heart is designed to work without failure at least until you are delivered. That may not be a particularly comforting thing to know about your heart. But can we do better? At least for women, I think we can.
Okay, so I'll leave. Let's take the break, and we'll come back at 3:10 and continue then. All right, guys. Yes, boom. Hello. Welcome back. Okay. So the claim is if you have a part that has a retention date, that is, you've declared that it should function for a certain amount of time, and then it stops, then you shouldn't divine, it wouldn't seem to make sense to build a design vital parts to fail before this thing failed. And the placenta tells us on that basis that, well, our hearts shouldn't fail before we're born. Not very comforting, but there it is. But in women, we may be able to say
We will
more.
consider a special collection of cells in women called primary oocytes. Primary oocytes are precursors of ovum, and ovum come from no other place. Remarkably, all the primary oocytes a woman will ever have are present at her birth. There is no mechanism to make more during her life.
So that's kind of an amazing thing. When a woman is born, she has these primary oocytes. And these things give her the ovum, eggs that she will produce each month on average during her lifetime. But it's a finite supply. There's no way she can get more of these primary oocytes. And therefore, her ovaries or the ovaries are designed to fail when these primary oocytes run out. Okay.
A simplified model of the ovaries is as a kind of hourglass. Before birth, the top of the glass is filled with a number of primary oocytes. At birth, the primary oocytes begin to move from the top to the bottom of the glass. At menarche, they begin to move at a faster rate. When the primary oocytes run out, the woman has reached menopause.
Okay, so at birth, these primary oocytes actually just die on their own at a certain rate. They just go away. Okay, but when puberty is reached, they start to move down at a faster rate. They fall from the supply into becoming ovum, etc. Okay, and when the primary oocytes are gone, the woman has reached menopause.
Menopause. I will assume that the number of primary oocytes that a woman is born with is designed by the genes and is largely independent of the environment. By the reasoning above, the gene should design a woman's heart and other vital organs not to fail before the primary oocytes run out, that is, not before the woman reaches menopause. Since, on average, in the United States, menopause occurs at about 51 years of age, McKinley, Brambill, and Posner, 2008, the vital organs should not fail before age 51.
Okay, so we're claiming, we being me, are claiming that in women, until they reach menopause, their vital parts are designed to last at least until she reaches menopause. Okay.
This, in turn, has other interesting implications. For example, prior to menopause, women will rarely die from failing vital organs. If they do die, it will probably be, as a sequel to, an external cause. See when do humans die, such as accidents, homicides, suicides, infectious diseases, poor lifestyle choices such as obesity, smoking, and drug addiction. This and the remarks in When Do Humans Die? Regarding our current protected environment, suggests that prior to menopause women should have a particularly low rate of dying.
And I believe I looked it up once, and they do have a particularly low rate of dying prior to menopause.
Dying. As an aside, the
Yes.
situation for men is far less clear. For example, it is commonly asserted that men can continue to make new sperm throughout their lives, that there is no male menopause. As a consequence, at this point, the arguments above do not tell us much about how long the vital organs of men are designed to last. We cannot exclude the possibility that the genes have designed men and women to have very different vital parts. Current statistics indicate that on average women live longer than men and have first heart attacks 7 years later than men. Harvard, 2016. Further investigation might reveal more.
So, bottom line is, I'm asserting that because women reach menopause at 51, their vital organs are designed to last until about 51, or maybe longer, but not shorter. And therefore, they are unlikely to die of things like, organ failure and the like. And that combined with the fact that we live in a very protected environment due to the Industrial Revolution, mean that women, until they reach menopause, are pretty, live a long time, right? They're pretty protected. And that at this point, I can't apply the same reasoning to men. That's why it's about women. Okay, so moving on.
The grandmother hypothesis. Since women become menopausal at about 51, McKinley, Brambill, and Posner, 2008, but live for much longer, it is possible that the genes designed women to have early menopause.
See, it's a curious thing. They have menopause at 51, but they live, ballpark in the world, probably on average, well, at least 73 years because they live longer than men, right? So they go through a large period of their lives these days menopausal. So they can no longer produce ovum. By the way, there's a little vagueness here because menopause is defined in the medical profession to mean having no periods for at least a year. But, it doesn't remove the possibility that an egg could be occasionally produced. Okay, so
If that is the case, then why might the genes have taken this step, when doing so decreases women's reproductive lives and sacrifices the obvious evolutionary advantage of having more children?
So why would the genes, let's assume it's the genes that decided that at 51 women would reach menopause, but they also decided to build organs to last a certain amount of time, which in the current environment lasts far longer than the onset of menopause. So if the genes did that, why would they have done it? Because when you have a woman who is alive but past menopause, her reproductive life is over. Yes. So this early menopause comes with a burden that the menopausal woman, while still alive, is not going to give you any more return on investment directly. She's not going to produce any more children. Yes. So this is a bit of a conundrum. Why would this happen?
If that is the case, then why might the genes have taken this step, when doing so decreases women's reproductive lives and sacrifices the obvious evolutionary advantage of having more children? Among the hypotheses that have been put forth to explain this is the grandmother hypothesis. The genes designed women to have early menopause so that they could devote more resources to their grandchildren.
That's the grandmother hypothesis, that a woman at 51 stops producing babies, becomes menopausal and stops producing babies, because then she's free to act as a grandmother and help raise the grandchildren. And when I hear this, I immediately have a detector that goes off that says, doesn't sound right. And I think this occurs a lot in hypotheses that exist in various scientific disciplines, that they don't sound right. There's something wrong with this reasoning. Okay, so I'm going to describe what I think is better reasoning for if the genes did indeed design women for early menopause.
Among the hypotheses that have been put forth to explain this is the grandmother hypothesis. The genes designed women to have early menopause so that they could devote more resources to their grandchildren. I do not subscribe to the grandmother hypothesis. To begin, I find the evidence in support of the hypothesis unconvincing. First, that postmenopausal women devote resources to their grandchildren can be understood without appealing to menopause at all. For obvious reasons, the genes designed both men and women so that throughout their lives they would expend some of their resources in support of closely related individuals. Since women and men currently live for a long time, they now have the opportunity to devote resources to their grandchildren and sometimes even their great-grandchildren.
So just by living a long time, both men and women, will be available to provide resources to their grandchildren and even great-grandchildren. So we don't need the grandmother hypothesis to say that that's the reason. We see that anyway.
Grandchildren. Second, do postmenopausal women devote more resources to their grandchildren? I doubt that anyone has done a controlled experiment to confirm that this is the case. I expect that the argument in support of this assertion goes something like this: making babies and raising them uses resources, so if women stop making babies, they will have more resources to expend on their grandchildren. But this argument could be used in support of other hypotheses that we know are incorrect. For example, the genes designed women to stop having sex, or stop exercising at the onset of menopause. These activities use resources that might otherwise be expended on grandchildren. But my biggest concern with the grandmother hypothesis is not the insufficient evidence, but that it fails to provide an adequate explanation of the evolutionary advantage conferred to the genes by early menopause.
See, that's why this hypothesis raises alarms. Not because there's a lack of evidence, though there isn't any evidence to speak of that it's correct, but the biggest concern is you have to look at when the genes do something, it's for an evolutionary advantage. So if indeed they created women to have early menopause, that is menopause before they die, then there has to be a firm evolutionary reason why that's happening, not just a bunch of observations, which are weak here anyway. Okay, so let's explore
But
that.
my biggest concern with the grandmother hypothesis is not the insufficient evidence, but that it fails to provide an adequate explanation of the evolutionary advantage conferred to the genes by early menopause. Whatever advantage added support for grandchildren might confer seems rather weak stuff to offset the obvious disadvantage of a shortened reproductive life.
It just doesn't make sense that you would shorten the reproductive life with its obvious benefits for this very weak thing. Well, greater support for the grandchildren. That's suspicious.
Despite my skepticism regarding the grandmother hypothesis, I do suspect that the genes designed women to have early menopause. Here is a hypothesis that I prefer. Call it the mother hypothesis. The genes designed women to have early menopause to prolong their lives and enhance reproductive success. Until very recently, pregnancy and childbirth were major causes of death in women. For example, estimates of maternal mortality in the 18th century placed the rate at roughly 1 to 2 deaths per 100 births. Loudon, 9.
So every time a woman gets pregnant and begins to give birth, she has a 1 to 2% chance of dying during that process. That means it's a pretty dangerous thing for a woman to do.
1986. It seems reasonable to assume that the rate would have been at least this high for thousands of years before then. The genes designed women to have early menopause because it was an economical way to remove these burdens and thus prolong the lives of women who then might survive long enough to raise their last-born children.
Okay, so the reasoning here is that if you give women early menopause, you prolong their lives because they don't have to give birth and they don't have to face this 1 to 2 deaths per 100 births. So that allows them to live longer. Okay. Why do you want the women to live longer, even though they're not reproducing? Because the last born children of these women may be very young and have very little chance of surviving if they don't have a mother around. So it's very cheap for the genes to say, okay, stop having menopause, stop having children, remove the risk of dying soon and leaving behind young children who won't survive. Okay, so that I think is more sustainable argument than the grandmother.
As an aside, notice that because childbirth is not a major cause of death in men, we should not expect an analogous father hypothesis, that men become infertile to prolong their lives and help raise their last-born children. Lenote, other?
Okay, so this raises a question. I, from time to time, encounter hypotheses that I find very suspect, and that on deeper analysis, they don't seem to hold water. Okay, and we encountered one before, the baby walking one, when Joao drew our attention to the question of why babies do not walk until they're 11 months old. Okay. And he gave the what I'll call standard answer.
He gave the standard answer about women's pelvises being smaller because of upright walking, and the resulting need for babies to be born with smaller brains that needed to grow after birth to get good enough to permit walking. This seems to me to be highly unlikely to be the correct answer. By the way, I looked into this a bit more, and according to Chap, the brain size of gazelles varies by species, but in...
Okay, so gazelles, we know, start walking minutes after they're born, right? And the claim is that human babies have these brains that are small and immature, and they need to grow bigger before they gain the skills to walk. Okay, so I asked, how big is the brain of a newborn gazelle? And their brains are relatively small at birth. This is ChatGTP, typically weighing about 20 to 30 grams. That is 0.7 to 1 ounce.
Adult gazelles, the brain weight of a fully grown gazelle is approximately 60 to 80 grams, 2.1 to 2.8 ounces. Gazelles are precocial animals, meaning they are relatively well developed at birth, which includes a fairly functional brain that allows them to move and react to predators soon after being born. Newborn human brain.
So the newborn human brain weighs 350 to 400 grams, compared to the gazelle's 20 to 30 grams. But even that little brain in the gazelle is enough to allow the gazelle to walk. Our brains are much bigger at birth, and we can't walk. That doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Okay, and then further,
LBS. The human brain grows rapidly in early childhood, reaching about 80 to 90% of its adult size by age 2 to 3. However, it continues to develop and refine neural connections well into adulthood. A newborn quail's brain is extremely small, typically weighing around 0.1 to 0.2 grams.
Okay. So guess what well, actually, I shouldn't have said quails. Probably I should have said geese or ducks, but I'm sure the size of the brain is not much different. So I should have looked at that. But let's presume that a duck has 0.2 grams of brain. But quails, like ducks, are
Grams,
what
100 to
people
200 milligrams. Since quail hatchlings are precocious,
precocial is a word I didn't know. It means born, developed enough uh, to walk immediately, and in some cases to follow their parents around. Ducks do that. Okay. Oops.
precocial, they are born with relatively well-developed brains compared to altricial birds, allowing them to move, peck, and follow their parents soon after hatching.
So we have that a quail is born with a brain that's 0.2 grams, and yet it can walk immediately after birth. Babies are born with what, 1,500 times as big brains, and they can't? Okay, it it's a choice that they don't. It's a choice made by the genes, not because of anything to do with the pelvis and stuff like that, is my position on this. Okay, so any comments on that? Okay, William. No, wait. I'm supposed to go to Kushal Kala Indi.
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can.
Um, I guess yeah. I wanted to comment on like the the theory of like kind of early menopause, and also I guess yeah. I just have a question about it. So
Yeah.
something like so it's proposed that like early menopause is kind of it's like it's a function of the genes applying like trying to weigh out the benefit of reproductive ability past a certain age and also the woman's ability to survive. But I think I think early menopause also does come with its own complications that do affect like a woman's survival, right? Like because of the hormonal changes that happen in a woman at that age. If it's too early, or around that age, like women are usually at more risk of like osteoporosis and like heart disease, and just a bunch of other like they're more prone to arthritis, the autoimmune diseases. Like it, I'm not like it is true that at the end of the day, women still do live longer. So, but I just think that it's kind of more complex, the mechanisms that allow women to live longer, because there are, if you do look at early menopause, there are complications that come into play that just affect the woman's survival in general. And I guess also have a question like if we just it's I guess the method we're approaching with like this is like observing the way the body is as it is, and just assuming the preens have been doing their best to like all the decisions they've been making is to benefit the survival of the human, or I guess whatever goals the preens have, right? Reproduction and survival.
Their own survival. Yeah.
I guess like does that leave like there are some parts of the human body that are like flawed, and like I guess everything, any living being that has, there are mechanisms inside it that do cause problems for
Yes.
the survival of like whatever species. So like for us, like the appendix is a common uh problem where some people say there are some benefits, but it has probably before we had like any surgeries, it's probably killed more people than it's like saved. So like if we use this kind of way of observing, just assuming that the Greens have just been doing the right action every time, like does that leave room for um like flaws to occur? Like they're even in code, like
Yeah.
when we have like old code or something like that, like even from the Windows days, there's still bugs in that that are just persistent for years that just don't necessarily need to be there. Like, and there wasn't like an intention to have those. It's just like it's just happened to be there.
Well, there's a lot in what you say. You've touched on a number of issues, and I particularly, let's see, one of them had to do with the appendix, and I want to get back to that. But you raised a whole bunch of issues. Those issues that you raised are the same issues that I was looking at. But I'm trying to sort out from all of these, flowing contradictory things, some principles that I think apply. Okay. And the principles I come up with in this context are that if the genes did indeed design women so that they'd have menopause before their expected time of death, then there has to be a good reason, because the obvious disadvantage of not being able to reproduce. And the good reason I came up with is the one I just, exposed. Now, but there's a lot going on, and this is kind of typical of inquiries that we have into what's actually happening in the natural world, because it's really, really complex, right? But I still think that these principles have currency. They still have weight. Now, I do want to turn to the appendix thing, because I have thought about that. And we have this idea that our appendices are vestigial. They're just leftovers, and they're on their way out the door. Yes? And they are disadvantageous to us. Okay. In our current environment. Maybe they were good a long time ago in those environments, but right now they don't, right? And I'm not saying that's not the case, but I do want to reflect on that in the context going back to Darwin. So when Darwin gave the theory of evolution, one of the major issues that seemed to not be adequately addressed, and I think this is actually Darwin brought this up himself, but I'm not that clear on that, was how is it that an animal suddenly develops a wing that allows it to fly? Okay. Did it just happen that some animal was walking around one day? It was some animal that, like a pig or something. And then this mutant comes along and boom, he can fly. That seems rather suspicious, right? That's how flying occurred. And rather, people insisted that it must have been that there was some transition in some animal of more and more wing-like things, that each step of which provided an evolutionary advantage to that species, that ultimately led to the point where the wings, could lift an animal and they could fly. That there had to be a sequence of advantages that would lead to flying animals. Another example was, how do you get an electric eel that can, for example, zap a human, kill them maybe? you know, it wasn't that probably that some fish was swimming around and then had a mutant child, and this mutant child could suddenly produce a gazillion, whatever the units of electricity are, and kill people. That seems hard to believe. There must have been a sequence of little steps where fish type animals were using electric stuff to do more and more advantageous things until finally they could zap, humans, say. You follow this?
Yeah.
So this was the sort of missing link argument, I guess, is what it could be called. So people insisted, and objected to Darwin's theory because you didn't know where all the missing links were, and it's hard to imagine what they might be, though in some cases we now know about these missing links. But okay, but why shouldn't we apply the same thing to organs that appear to be changing and getting smaller, like the appendix? If there has to be a sequence of steps where the appendix gets smaller and smaller and smaller until it drops off, but each of those steps has to be justified by providing an evolutionary advantage as you get smaller and smaller and smaller. So the idea that the appendix is vestigial and just on its way out and we can't wait to get rid of it and the genes are trying is just not the case. It's much more likely that the appendix we have, we got to because we had a bunch of steps that were advantageous along the way. And the fact that we haven't got rid of it right now means that the genes have not found the advantageous steps, probably, that will lead to its going away. And at this point, without further assumptions, the appendix is the right size. The genes don't, when they try to go smaller, doesn't work out as well as the one they have now. Okay. Blah, blah, blah. So that appendix thing is also something I don't believe, right? That, it's vestigial, it's bad. Yeah, it might be bad in this environment, in which case there'll be evolutionary pressure that future humans will have smaller ones or less likely to cause disease. But the environment changes, and
Right.
maybe it will be good to have this vestigial thing around. I don't know. Okay, so that's one thing. And maybe, okay, Ryan. Oh, wait, no, William. William?
Yes, this is about the brains.
Yes, the brains. Yes.
Yeah, I think the reason why could be that that we walk later is because maybe we don't need to essentially. Our parents take care of us when
Absolutely.
we're young.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And there's a word for that, a word I didn't know before I did this investigation. Whoever is professional in whatever area we're talking about speaks of precocial animals, which their parents don't take care of as much of that, don't protect them, and they tend to walk quick and adapt to the environment all by themselves to keep from getting eaten, for example. And then the other type are called I think it's altricial animals that are protected by their parents and don't exhibit those independent behaviors early on in life. Okay. And yes, I think that you are right. The reason humans do not, babies are not precocial is because our environment is not the environment that some poor gazelle born on the, right? the environment has led us to different choices. And so our babies don't walk. Yeah. They, you know, they're not worried about some wildebeest or not wildebeest, some lion eating them. Okay, so I think what you're saying is consistent with what I'm thinking too, William. Ryan.
So I read this is relating to the hypothesis on why there's like an early menopause. I read online that like as a man gets older, their sperm sort of, I think because the something in the testes like keeps reproducing and then it like sort of mutates over time. I don't know, but it like
Yeah.
children that are born later, because of the sperm, are like more likely to or like more susceptible to birth defects. I'm wondering if that's either the male equivalent of menopause or if it's like that because it stops being like sort of beneficial for men to like bother to keep those things like in working order because menopause occurs, or if this is a reason for menopause because like why create new children when these children are likely to not be like very fit because of the sperm not working. I don't know where the causality goes here, but I think these things are related.
Yes, and I have thought a lot along the very lines that you're suggesting here. And I'm very unsure of this male menopause assumption, whether it exists or doesn't exist or exists in some form. That is, it is true that if you look at sperm production in older males, they don't produce as much, they don't produce as good, etc. And you can actually look inside the testicles and see signs of degradation or whatever. Okay, so you do see that. Now, I have another reason why I'm skeptical about males being able to sustain, reproductive fecundity beyond a certain amount of time. And that's this. And this is rather complicated, but I'll just hint at what I'm suggesting. If you're going to keep making sperm for a long time, then that sperm that you're now making has to come from someplace. Okay. That is, and there are roughly speaking two choices. You were born with a certain number of sperm producing baby sperm analogous to primary oocytes. And that's why, you just run out. The time of running out may be unclear. Okay. Or if you look at it, there's precursors. Okay. The sperm have to have precursors in order to create new sperm. And those precursors could be a sort of primary oocyte kind of thing, or they could be precursors of precursors of precursors, in a long way. But the other thing they can be doing is be their own precursors, that a sperm can actually form other sperm. And if that's the case, then you get in a situation where you have this type of cell which can reproduce sort of all by itself and make more of itself. And that seems to me to be a huge potential cancer risk. And so all I can do is mumble at this point, but I'm sure you grasp what I'm getting at. So, okay, Anthony, carry on.
I remember learning that back to like the walking situation,
Yeah.
that like I mean I feel like it's more cultural and environmental, like on how like humans at least learn how to walk. Because I remember learning like that when babies are more swaddled, like when they're like infants and stuff, that it's shown that they take longer for the motor reflexes of walking and all that stuff like that to develop. In like other countries that don't swaddle their baby as much or don't swaddle their baby at all, they do learn how
Yes.
to walk faster.
Yeah, that could well be the case, and I think I could understand that. But what I'm particularly trying to rebut is this idea that, well, human babies have such small brains, they simply can't work out the walking thing. Whereas they have 350 gram baby weight brains, and a quail or a duck has 0.2 gram brains, and it can walk and follow its parents around, right? So it isn't brain size that is determining this. Yeah. So, okay, got it. So I have another question though. Having dispensed with the grandmother hypothesis and the baby walking hypotheses are ubiquitous, I want to know, and maybe you guys can think about this for the next lecture, what other commonly held beliefs in science are questionable and may deserve greater scrutiny? And very often, the problem is people don't look at the evolutionary advantages. They just look at some observation of what's going on in the world. Okay, I have one possible example, but Ryan has 11. Ryan?
The one that comes immediately to my mind is one that I was looking into for the term paper. I think it's called the gay uncle hypothesis, or like the gay
Yes,
older
I've
brother
heard.
hypothesis.
Yes, I've heard that. Please go on.
Um,
Yeah.
yeah, the for my term paper, I was looking at like altruistic preens. So like in particular, like homosexuality, because we see it in like other animals besides humans too. So clearly there must be some evolutionary benefit, but it's not really reproductively beneficial. So I was kind of looking into it for that reason. But the
Mhm.
gay older brother hypothesis, I think it's called.
Yeah.
It turns out in humans, if you have more older brothers, it is likely, and you are male, it is likely that you are a like homosexual male, more likely. So the more older brothers you have, the more likely it is that you turn out to be gay if you are male from the same mother.
So,
And we're not quite sure why that is, and there are a couple of theories, one of which is something to do with like the woman's body, like the immune system somehow like attacking the maleness out of the new like fetus, which seems a little weird, but I don't know.
let me stop you for a second. Uh, to me, the let's call it the general, what's it called? The something uncle
I
hypothesis.
think it's
I
called the gay
forget.
uncle hypothesis.
The gay uncle hypothesis suffers from the same problem and sounds very similar to the grandmother hypothesis to me. And all of these things that people bring up supporting or perhaps not supporting the gay uncle hypothesis fail to look at it evolutionarily. Just tell me the evolutionary advantage, because once again, the gay uncle ain't reproducing. So tell me the compensation, and don't just mumble, oh, he helps raise the kid. That's like the grandmother hypothesis, right?
Yeah,
I
there
want something more substantial. I want to know a reason why that we
aside
can.
from the altruism that you brought up, which I think is the crux of the gay uncle hypothesis, there's also like an interesting hypothesis that I found that like actually homosexuality per se isn't really a preen. It's more so just like there's a gene that's like attraction to gender X, and regardless of what gender that attraction gene winds up in, it if it mostly winds up in the right gender, then it's going to be evolutionarily beneficial. And also, the other thing that's interesting, um, actually, just because you're homosexual doesn't mean that you will not reproduce. So, and some of them still do reproduce. So, if you have the attraction to male, like extra strong attraction to male, like gene, and you are a male, and you do have children, and those children are women, then that's going to be evolutionarily like beneficial to reproduction, which I thought was really interesting.
Okay, so uh, let's make some meta comments, or I want to make some meta comments. One is, I don't care whether you're gay or not, all right? It's fine with me. All right. Number two is, uh, I want to look at things evolutionarily. And all these other arguments, which have to do with non-evolutionary views of things, are not sufficient for me. So, do I know whether being gay is largely social or largely genetic? I don't know. But I don't like the gay uncle hypothesis. That does not convince me. All right. So that's sort of where I'm at. But what an excellent example. Yes, I've heard of that, and that's really good. I have one other example, by the way, that I thought was sort of interesting. Uh, you will see that, uh, especially among Jews that I know, being one myself, that circumcision uh, is good for health. Okay. And you can find all sorts of arguments of why that's the case. Now, the other option is it's just some social, it's a cultural preen thing that happened, and that's why it occurs, and it has nothing to do with health, and it may even be detrimental to health, right? But I don't know the answer, and I can see possibilities why circumcision would be good for the health. But by and large, there's a very heavy burden for me to believe that God just messed up on humans, because foreskins are ubiquitous in mammals, and nature just happened to not to keep them on all animals but screwed up on people. Probably not. On the other hand, I can see potential reasons why, since we live so long, it might in fact later in life be beneficial. But I don't know. That's another one. But if you guys can come up with any other ones, like to hear them. Okay, so maybe we'll make that topic one for next time. All right, as usual, it was edifying and, for me at least, fun. All right, see you guys next time.